Men like you are cowards. The words exploded across the courtroom like a hammer striking steel. Judge Harold Albbright leaned forward, eyes blazing, his voice dripping with contempt. You sit there, Mr. Stewart, too proud to admit fault. A simple traffic violation, and you drag this town through a trial as if you're above the law. You think your age, your so-called service, gives you the right to spit on this court. Gas rippled through the small gallery. Some shifted uncomfortably, others stared at the frail man at the defense table. But James Stewart did not flinch. At 83, he sat straight back, his pale blue eyes fixed ahead, refusing to look at the judge. That silence enraged Albbright. Look at me when I speak to you, the judge thundered. You think you're a hero? No. You're a stubborn old man wasting our time. You survived long enough to convince yourself you matter. But here in my courtroom, you're nothing. Ben Carter, the young defense attorney, rose halfway to his feet. Your Honor, with respect, my client. Sit down, Albbright barked. His hand cut the air like a blade. Don't speak for him. Let him answer. Let the people see what kind of man hides behind silence. The judge sneered, his voice dripping venom. Tell us, Mr. Stewart, what did you really do in uniform? Push papers in a safe office. Peel potatoes while real men fought. You dare come into my courtroom with this attitude? You dare show me contempt? James remained silent. Albright's face reddened, his voice rising. This isn't courage. This is arrogance. This is cowardice. You wear your years like a shield, but underneath you're nothing more than a fraud. A coward who hides behind the myth of service, expecting pity, expecting privilege. The word coward hung in the air like poison. Ben clenched his fists under the table. He had served, he knew the look of true veterans, the quiet ones who never bragged. And he knew what he was witnessing now wasn't weakness. It was something else. But the judge only pressed harder, circling like a predator. So, Mr. Stewart, he hissed, leaning forward, where did you serve? Germany, some forgotten base? Or maybe you never left the States. Maybe all this talk of honor is just that talk, empty, like you. The room was silent. The insult cut deeper than anyone expected, and still the old man didn't move, didn't speak. That silence, it wasn't submission, it was defiance, and Judge Albbright couldn't stand it. The silence after the insult was unbearable. Judge Albbright leaned back with a smug smile, certain he had broken the old man. In the gallery, a few spectators shook their heads, some whispering nervously. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably, his hand hovering near his belt, as if bracing for something to explode. But James Stewart did not move. He sat upright, eyes fixed on the seal of California behind the bench, as though the judge's words had never landed. No tremor in his hands, no anger flashing across his face. Just silence, unyielding, unnerving silence. That silence infuriated Albbright. He pounded the bench, once the sound cracking like a whip. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he barked. Arrogance, defiance. He thinks he's too good to answer for his actions. Ben Carter clenched his fists under the table. He wanted to shout back to remind the judge that his client was a veteran who had earned the right to be treated with dignity. But then he saw James's thumb brushing against his wrist beneath the cuff of his shirt, a tiny, almost invisible movement, yet deliberate. Ben's breath caught. He had noticed it before. Once during their first meeting, the old man's sleeve had slipped and revealed a faded tattoo blurred with age, nearly illegible. A skull with wings. Now it all clicked. He had heard about that symbol in Afghanistan, whispered among special operations troops. Spectre. A ghost story told by men who swore it was real. A unit that went where no one else would, missions no one admitted. The kind of name that lived only in rumor, in classified files. And it was inked on the wrist of the man sitting silently beside him. Ben's pulse raced. This wasn't arrogance. This wasn't cowardice. This was something else entirely, something the judge could never begin to understand. He slid his phone from his pocket, shielding it with a legal pad. His fingers flew over the screen as he typed. Santa Maria Superior Court. Judge railroading elderly vet James Stewart called him coward. Stewart has faded tattoo skull with wings. Think Spectre emblem. Need confirmation? Urgent. He hit send the message, shooting across the digital void to Master Sergeant David Miller at Vandenberg Air Force Base, just an hour away. It was a desperate gamble, but Ben knew he had no other choice. Meanwhile, James's mind drifted. The courtroom walls dissolved into jungle. The air grew thick with the smell of rot and cordite. He could hear the heavy chop of rotor blades overhead, the desperate voices crackling in his headset. "Spectre One, come in! Spectre One, we're surrounded!" For a moment he was back in the cockpit of a blacked-out helicopter over Laos radio, in hand guiding men to safety through chaos and fire. The ink on his wrist burned with memory, the promise he had made in the dark, the lives tied forever to his call sign. Then, as quickly as it came, the memory was gone. He was back in the courtroom, Judge Albright's smug grin waiting like a predator's. You see, the judge crowed, mistaking that faraway look for confusion. Nothing to say, nothing at all. Just a shell of a man hiding behind silence. The spectators shifted again. Some were uneasy, others ashamed, as if sensing they were witnessing something wrong, something unjust. But James Stewart said nothing. His silence was his shield. And Ben Carter, heart-pounding, knew that silence was about to shake the entire court to its core. At Vandenberg Air Force Base, Master Sergeant David Miller was drowning in paperwork when his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it until he saw the name Ben Carter. Miller opened the message, his casual expression vanishing as his eyes scanned the words. By the time he reached "Skull with Wings," the blood drained from his face. He shot out of his chair, sending it clattering into the wall. "No way," he muttered. His boots pounded down the hallway, airmen turning their heads as he sprinted past. He didn't stop until he burst into the office of Colonel Matt, his commanding officer. Sir, Miller gasped. "We have a ghost protocol situation." Colonel Matt's head snapped up. His calm demeanor shifted instantly into razor focus. "Explain." Miller shoved the phone forward. A civilian courtroom in Santa Maria. Judge targeting an elderly vet named James Stewart. Tattoo Spectre emblem. Ben Carter confirms it. The colonel's eyes narrowed. He crossed the room in 3 strides, logging into a secure terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard faster than anyone expected from a man his age. One name, one call sign. James Stewart. Spectre One. The screen flickered. Then a single classified file appeared, glowing crimson, eyes only. Ghost protocol active. Matt inhaled sharply. My God. He grabbed the secure phone on his desk and punched in a number he knew by heart. "Get me General Creighton. Priority Alpha." Within seconds, a gravelly voice answered. "This had better be real, Colonel." "It is, sir. Spectre One is alive. He's in a civilian courtroom right now being humiliated by a local judge." A long pause. Then an eruption of curses so sharp even Miller flinched. Finally, the general's tone dropped to a deadly calm. "A traffic court has Spectre One. Do you understand who that man is?" "Yes, sir." "Then listen carefully. Get a security detail in the air now. Dress blues, full honors. I'm leaving for Santa Maria myself. That judge won't know what hit him. Do it with respect. Do it now." Back in the courtroom, Judge Albright droned on, stacking insult upon insult as though words could bury the old man alive. The gallery shifted uneasily, sensing something wrong, but not daring to speak. The bailiff looked ready to collapse from discomfort. Then the judge raised his gavel. "James Stewart, given your age, I won't waste this court's time with fines or jail. Instead, I am ordering a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. Bailiff, take the defendant into custody." The bailiff hesitated, reluctant, but duty forced him forward. He placed a hand on James's shoulder. For the first time that morning, James turned his head. His pale eyes locked on the bailiff's, calm yet piercing, as if looking into the very core of the man. The bailiff's hand recoiled instinctively, like touching live electricity. And then it happened. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Not slammed, not crashed, opened with a deliberate authority that silenced every whisper. 2 Air Force Security Forces airmen entered, first their dress uniforms, immaculate, their movements sharp, disciplined. They flanked the entrance like sentinels. Behind them came another figure, a man in his late 50s, shoulders broad beneath a constellation of ribbons and medals. On his uniform gleamed 4 silver stars. His steps echoed across the marble floor, each one hammering into the stunned silence. "General Creighton." The gallery rose instinctively. Even those who had never seen a general before knew they were in the presence of authority. Albright sputtered, his face shifting from red to pale. "What is the meaning of this?" "This is my courtroom." But Creighton ignored him. His eyes were locked on James Stewart, still seated, still silent. The general's pace quickened until he stood directly before the defendant. Then in a motion so crisp it made the air itself vibrate, he snapped to attention and saluted. Colonel Stewart, his voice boomed, filling every corner of the courtroom. General Creighton, United States Air Force. It is an honor to see you again, sir. The room froze. The word colonel hung like thunder. James Stewart rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He returned the general's gaze and gave the faintest nod. General? His voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than all of Albright's shouting combined. The judge's gavel slipped from his hand, clattering against the bench. For the first time all morning, he was speechless. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the steady click of the general's polished shoes as he adjusted his stance. His salute remained sharp, unwavering, held for the man the world thought was just another aging veteran. Colonel Stewart, General Creighton, repeated, his voice resonant. You honor us with your presence. The gallery erupted in whispers. Colonel heads snapped back and forth between the frail old man and the imposing general. Even the bailiff stood frozen, unsure whether to move or bow. James Stewart inclined his head, his voice low but steady. General, Albbright finally found his tongue. He shot to his feet, his face blotchy with rage and disbelief. What is going on here? This is a court of law. I am the judge here, not you. You have no authority in this room. General Creighton turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing with icy precision. When he spoke, his voice cut sharper than any gavel. You will be silent, Judge, or I will have my men silence you. The words landed like a blow. Albbright recoiled, the weight of the moment pressing him back into his chair. Then Creighton turned, facing the courtroom. His tone shifted, not softer, but commanding, carrying the weight of history. For the record, and for those of you who have no idea who sits before you, today this man is Colonel James Stewart, United States Air Force retired. The man you dared call a coward is a decorated hero. He has received the Air Force Cross, the Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Purple Heart, and the Medal of Honor itself, awarded by President Lyndon B. Johnson. A collective gasp tore through the room. One woman in the gallery covered her mouth. Another man stood slowly, placing his hand over his heart. Creighton wasn't finished. He was a founding member of our Special Operations Program in the 1960s. He flew more than 200 combat missions over North Vietnam and Laos in aircraft so experimental their existence was barely acknowledged. On one mission, his bird was shot down. Wounded alone, he evaded capture for 3 days. 3 days while directing airstrikes that saved an entire company of Army Rangers who had been surrounded. He refused evacuation until every last one of those men was safe. The general's voice thundered. We called him Spectre One because he was a ghost. He went where no one else could, and he brought our boys home. This man has done more for this country in a single afternoon than you, Judge, will achieve in 100 lifetimes of waving that wooden hammer. All eyes turned to Albbright. His face, once flushed with arrogance, was now ashen. The robe that gave him power only hours ago seemed nothing more than cloth draped over a small petty man. General Creighton's words fell like a verdict no gavel could erase. Your conduct today is a disgrace to your robe, to this court, and to the nation this man has defended. And for the first time since the trial began, the room belonged to James Stewart. For the first time all morning, James Stewart spoke. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It was steady, measured, and every word carried the weight of decades. Respect, he said, his eyes locking on Judge Albbright, is not given by a robe or title or gavel. Respect is earned through what you do day after day when no one is watching. Courage isn't about shouting the loudest or demanding obedience. Most of the time, courage is quiet. It is doing the right thing when it costs you everything. The courtroom was silent. No one moved, no one dared breathe too loudly. Even Albbright sat frozen, stripped of the power he once wielded. James's gaze shifted to the gallery. His voice softened, but it carried even further. We all fight our own battles. Some of them are public. Most are not. But before you judge another man, before you call him coward, make sure you know whose ground you're standing on. The room seemed to shrink under the gravity of his words. And then as he spoke, a memory surged, unbidden, unstoppable. Smoke, gunfire, the metallic taste of blood in the back of his throat. A young pararescue medic lying on a cot, his chest wrapped in bloody bandages. His name was Miller, just a kid from Ohio. His grip weak but desperate as he pulled James close. Don't let them forget us, Spectre. The boy rasped, blood frothing at his lips. Don't let them forget what we did here. James had squeezed his hand, voice firm despite the chaos around them. Never, I promise. That promise was carved into his soul. It was why he could not bend to a false charge, not even a meaningless traffic ticket. Honor was not negotiable. The memory faded. He stood taller, calmer, as though the promise itself had carried him through the years. General Creighton stepped forward, placing a firm but gentle hand on Stewart's shoulder. Let's go home, Jimmy, he said softly, a note of reverence in his voice. Together they walked down the aisle. The two airmen fell into step behind them, forming an impromptu honor guard. One by one, the people in the gallery rose to their feet. Some placed hands over their hearts. Others wiped tears from their eyes. No one spoke. The silence was its own salute. By the time the heavy doors closed, the trial was over. The case was dismissed with prejudice before General Creighton's vehicle had even cleared the parking lot. News of the confrontation spread quickly, first whispered by the court stenographer, then racing through local reporters and finally bursting onto national headlines. Judge Humiliate's Medal of Honor recipient. The story went viral. The fallout for Judge Albbright was swift and brutal. He was suspended, his career effectively destroyed. Forced to issue a public apology, he was also ordered into a year-long program on Veterans Affairs and sensitivity training. By the time it was over, the robe that had once made him untouchable was nothing more than a reminder of his arrogance. James Stewart, meanwhile, wanted nothing. No interviews, no speeches, no fame. He simply returned to his quiet life in Santa Maria. On Tuesdays, he met his fellow veterans for coffee at a small diner. He tended to his garden. He lived as he always had, without seeking attention, without demanding recognition. Months later, as he sat at his usual table with a steaming cup of black coffee, a man approached. His face was pale, lined with regret. It was Albbright. He stood there for a long moment, shifting awkwardly, before finally speaking. Mr. Stewart, he said, his voice hushed, almost breaking. There's nothing I can say to undo what I did. But I need you to know I'm sorry. James studied him for a moment. He no longer saw the arrogant tyrant from the bench. What stood before him now was simply a broken man. James gave a single, slow nod. It was enough. Albbright turned and walked away, carrying the weight of his lesson. And James returned to his coffee, silent as ever. Because true valor does not shout. It does not demand. It simply endures. The story of James Stewart reminds us that the greatest heroes often live among us, quietly, their medals hidden in drawers, their sacrifices known only to those who stood beside them. If his story moved you, honor his courage, leave a comment, share this video, and subscribe to Veteran Valor. Because the world should never forget men like Spectre One, men who prove that real courage is silent, steady, and unbreakable.